Welcome to our panel on cybersecurity. My name is Sandra Tobler. I'm co-founder and CEO of a startup called Future A. We do intuitive authentication based on ambient noise and sensors around you. And I'm very happy and pleased to have a very renowned panel with me this afternoon. So I would quickly like to remind you that you have the possibility to ask questions throughout our panel. Please go ask a question on the tab on your app and submit your questions. And I would like to hand over to my co-panelists. So Pierre, would you briefly introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Sandra. And I have to say I like your quote, as I think it's absolutely true that half the companies have been hacked, the other will be, and I think that's a certainty. That's why I believe this subject is super relevant. My background, basically, business-wise, I have two lives. One, I was a banker. I was started as a derivatives guy, then became global head of risk for Deutsche Bank in Frankfurt. And in 2000, I came to London to set up Deutsche Bank's venture fund. And we spun out in 2004. And since then, I have been involved in predominantly fintech investments, because that's the only thing I understand. And then lately got a little bit more involved, or strongly involved in blockchain, and through one of my companies in cybersecurity.
Thank you. Rafael, welcome.
Yeah, hi everyone. I come from the cybersecurity background. Without not too much saying, when I used to be 16 years old, I started from hacking my provider in order to give me more hours to the internet. And that's what is actually drive me into the cybersecurity. At that time was calling information security, or no longer exists. So today I'm a CIO. I control operations of a financial institution in order to control even on the security side and also the operation side, the innovative side. So that's me. I think one thing that I have to add into your code is there is one scenario possibility that there are companies that is already being hacked and they don't know about it. So it's just one edge.
Totally with you. Thank you.
Hi.
Rafael. Hi, Mark.
Mark James. I'm a partner at Oliver Wyman in London. I head up our cybersecurity practice in Europe. I've been with the firm about 9 years. I've spent about half of my time in industry and half in consulting. And I guess I've come at cybersecurity really from, I guess as a practitioner, building systems over the years, mostly in financial services and government. Information security has sort of risen up the list of things that we need to be paying attention to and spending our time on. And that was, I think, what initially sort of attracted me to the theme. But at the moment, cybersecurity is a super hot topic for the industry, for Oliver Wyman. The work we do for clients really sort of covers the gamut. We have a traditional strength in risk, and the link between cybersecurity and bank risk management is important, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about that. But we work in both the strategic as well as the operational side of cybersecurity, the tactical as well as the technical. And I mean, what we're finding is the challenge with most clients is sort of pulling everything together in a coherent and effective defense strategy that will withstand the current environment.
Mark, I would like to start with you. You have seen so many financial institutions. What type of threats are, in your view, the most dangerous and challenging ones for organizations?
I mean, it's an interesting question. We were actually debating this topic last week internally in the UK amongst a group of banks and regulators. And I mean, there were definitely split views. There's no question that state-sponsored cyber attacks, terrorist-sponsored cyber attacks remain a huge threat. We've done a lot of work in the Middle East, and there are a lot of government agencies there that have been crippled by cyber attacks over the last 24 months. But if I were to point to one big challenge that I think maybe people underestimate, it's just the more mundane criminality. It's the cyber attacks that are being generated from criminal gangs. These are folks who, in the old days, would pull up to the bank in a horse with a gun and a mask and rob the bank. Now they're using cyber threats, and those cyber attacks are becoming increasingly sophisticated. They're becoming cheaper, easier to orchestrate. We've done our own research on the dark web. about the cost of hiring a DDoS attack or the cost of buying critical bank information from clients.
How expensive is a DDoS attack?
A DDoS attack you can get for 500 quid. Someone's identity you can buy for €1. This is not expensive. So anyone who's slightly motivated and has the least bit of technical savvy can threaten the banks. And I think increasingly the banks are realizing that this is it's not just a question of protecting themselves, but protecting the industry as a whole.
You need to make it as expensive as possible for organizations to get access to your sensitive data. Rafael, what are you seeing as from a CIO perspective? Which are the biggest threats?
Well, I think what is happening now, I think there's a shift in terms of the hardware vulnerabilities around the market. We know that we cannot cope patching system, and that's a big issue today, as WannaCry last year has proven us that we are not able to patch every single part of organization, and still a shed on IT. And I think with the hardware vulnerabilities around makes things a little bit more challenging. The reason is patching software is pretty straightforward. Sometimes this doesn't require too much work, but patching hardware, it could be sometimes you need to change the entire hardware. And that becomes a quite relevant problem into your organization. Most of exploits today are being exploited on the hardware, as you can see.
May I ask, is it due to process issues within the company or know-how issues? What do you think?
Well, it's a little bit of both, really. I think the scenario that we are facing now, we never had so much researchers looking into the hardware. And now things are getting more scale because people start to open that door and see, oh, hold on a second. For example, Intel vulnerability. Today, just for as we are talking, there are new 4 flaws from the spec that is being released. So as you can see, things are gonna start to increase on the hardware problem.
Pierre, you bring in a different angle into the discussions. I'm excited to hear of your broad view, seeing so much out there in cybersecurity.
Yeah, so Sandra, basically, so I think my colleagues, Mark and Rafael, already touched upon a lot of these things. I just want to go, and I read an interesting article last week about internal cyber risk or espionage. So funny enough, people were saying, like Mark said, most attacks are government-led. Funny enough, there was a research that a lot of competitor-led. A lot of competitors, even in Western Europe, attack each other and try to get information out of competitors. That's number one. Number two, and there I was really shocked. Each of you guys has a desktop PC, I guess. And you remember there's an Ethernet cable behind it, yeah? Red, blue, green, yellow. With an investment of 50 cents or 50 pence, you can put, there are cables delivered, which has a chip included, which allow the outside to listen to any conversation going on into this room and to listen to all email traffic, everything. So I agree with you. Hardware is something people don't look at. We look at defense of cyber attacks from the outside, but I guess there's even the same or even bigger risk from inside and also built into hardware. That's something most people or most companies are not even aware of.
So I would like to open up the discussion with the audience and learn about what you think is the biggest vulnerability within your organizations. So there's a poll possibility. You have the possibility to assess what's out from your view, and we are aware you're not all in cyber defense. However, what do you perceive for your organization is the biggest threat? I give you some options here. Please go to the application. You have the poll function under our panel session. So one option, network security, identity and access management, threat management, application security, cloud security, or email phishing. We would love to hear your view, and then I'm curious to see the responses. Have those vulnerability changed over the course of the last years? Have you seen some developments with technology till we wait? just anyone.
Well, I personally experience much more email phishing. I just think it's just getting crazy what you get on people supposedly being Dropbox, supposedly being some other stuff. I think it's just absolutely crazy, and I think I'm really looking that all these email providers, they're not investing enough or not providing enough security for these phishing emails, or where they can discover your data. That's at least my own experience.
Okay. Any other view?
Yes, I think on the cloud security, I would say. Everyone says, oh, we have a private cloud. That's, I think, is for me, on my suggestion, is the best way to go, but becomes expensive for operation point of view. But and then you have the public cloud that becomes kind of a visibility problem. So you rely all your digital assets in a third company that you believe they do everything is possible on the back end of your systems, but you lose the control. Losing the control, security is based on control, and losing control in visibility becomes quite critical. So I think that cloud security is an open issue.
Yeah, I would broaden that and say that actually, I think there's been a realization that third-party providers, vendors that you use, service companies that you use, are potentially exposing you to risks that you didn't even know were there. So how you supervise that and how you manage that risk is something that it seems like about 18 months ago there was this eureka moment amongst a lot of the financial services institutions we work with that, hey, this is something that we need to address in a systematic way.
Interesting, very different point of views. I'm excited to see the result of our poll, what the audience perceives is the biggest risk. So to a large extent, with 35% email phishing, so Pierre, some supporting audience. Then with 19%, we see network security, okay, so architecture fundamentals. And then there is a mixed field with 9.1%, it's threat management in general, and then, with 18.2% identity access management, and the rest of the field. Any comments or thoughts from panel?
I believe, again, that most of the audience like me, that's what we see day to day. That's the threats we see day to day in our office email or our private email. And I feel there's just an increase of these phishing emails, and they try to get more and more perfect in getting that. I think that's the reflection of what people see, Not too many people are exposed to network security or cloud security, what you guys said, I guess.
Absolutely. Although they have touch points. I mean, if you think of some famous attacks that have routed information through printers, through CCTVs, through other devices that might have been managed by any type of employee, awareness does not seem to be there necessarily. Yeah. You agree?
I think in various research, it proves the phishing is the entrance starting point for cybercriminal activity. So that's why it probably is the high level statistics show, because it's a kind of easy to operate, easy to attack, and cheaper to execute. So it's an entrance point of attack.
But it's interesting what that says, right? I mean, if you take a step back and think, well, what are the implications of this, right? We're saying actually, when we think about your greatest cyber vulnerabilities, it's your people. And we know that 80% of the cyber attacks the serious cyber attacks that we see, there is some internal issue, people issue that's been exploited either through lack of training or through some sort of infiltration. And I think everyone knows that. But what scares me is we do hard penetration testing where we leave memory sticks around and see if any the employee, the staff will put it in their computers, and we send phishing emails. And the success of those attacks, of those simulated attacks that we do, is astonishing. And we've sort of come to the conclusion that 15% of your bank staff will click on any email you send them, no matter how much you train them, no matter how. And the important thing is you need to figure out who the 15% are, and you need to make sure that they're not in a mission critical or in a position to really compromise your systems environment, right?
But I personally believe we need more security. We need more third-party providers to provide more email security. And that's why, I don't see enough. Again, I don't have a complete market overview, obviously, but I think that's something, it's an obvious one where just and it must be self-learning, obviously, like AI-based, in order to make sure that this, which seems to be Dropbox, but it's not Dropbox, for example. These kind of things, or it's Microsoft and it's not Microsoft. I think these are the things which I believe really could help a lot in my daily business, at least from my perspective.
Okay. On the other hand, I see Mark's point, like the human factor is a big risk across the organization. It's very interesting to elaborate a bit on all the experience you have seen in different organizations. I mean, in my view, I see there's a lot of fear-driven education, like just testing, punishing employees, warning them with, again, penetration testers. Have you seen other ways to educate or like bottom-up motivate or create awareness in organizations?
Yes, I have something to share. We start to do some cyber education into our organization to online tests, easy learning, and this proves to be very not effective at all, as we believe. So what we did, we actually expose in such a way, using social engineering, using phishing, using everything, but in a real mode that actually performing against our users, but showing the reality, what will happen, even taking a webcam picture when they get vulnerable. And that's kind of actually shakes more attention to the details, what they are doing.
Okay.
So showing the reality of attack.
In that context, I like to mention, I think, I still believe that boards of corporates or financial institutions don't put cybersecurity as one of their top priorities on their agenda. That's, again and again, I think for years I'm saying this in discussion, it's been on LinkedIn or wherever, I still feel that, I don't know, probably it's a little bit too provocative saying they don't take it serious enough, but every day, all of us read in the newspaper, on the web, another attack here, there, credit card data stolen, this stolen, this stolen. And it still seems to be that there's not enough investment going into cybersecurity. And that means also that awareness is also, cybersecurity awareness is a cultural thing, I believe. And it has to come down from top down. And if the board doesn't believe it's important, why should the rest of the company think about it and make an effort?
I'm absolutely with you, and maybe to share a little anecdote. I've seen a C-level individual that used to run a large retail bank in the UK a few weeks back, and I asked him, was cyber on your radar any time? Data breaches, anything similar? And he said, Sandra, no, couldn't care less. Regulation, I had 400 pages every week. Data protection, nah, yet. What is your view? Have you seen?
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I think in order to solve the problem, there needs to be a little bit of sort of self-recognition that there is a problem, right? If you want to correct your golf swing, you got to understand there's a problem with your golf swing as a first step. And I see a lot of dissembling amongst boards and C-suite executives around, you know, the cybersecurity issue. The old chestnut is, hey, this is an IT problem. You know, this is my IT guys have got this sorted out. But it's interesting. I met with the government last week that was sort of grappling with these issues at the government level, and what was revealing is, I guess, the sense that they knew that they struggled to supervise cybersecurity as a risk class. And we're looking for innovative ideas as to how they could do that, because they realize that the traditional way of thinking about risk appetite and risk-reward trade-off, and in many respects doesn't, the things that boards, look at on a day-to-day basis to run their companies, cyber it's a different type of threat that needs to be treated in a fundamentally different way. But that realization is important.
Yeah.
Yes, but also not only institution, but also if you look at the technology side, you see all these cool companies, and cybersecurity is just a foreign word. They haven't even looked at it. I'm on the board of a challenger bank or more lifestyle bank in New York, and from the very beginning we're now hiring a cybersecurity expert with some special background, because we believe from the very beginning the most important thing for a company and also for our customer and our customer data is we have to make sure that we fulfill the highest security standards. But if I look into the industry and look at a lot of technology companies provide services to companies, they also open doors because they don't put any emphasis on cybersecurity. I think we need a change, especially when I think about, Sandra, now IoT, and everyone speaks about IoT and connected cars and self-driving cars, and I believe, and these things can be hacked. We know what disasters may happen in the future. So that's what's shocking for me. We're thinking about that, huge market, but we don't invest into cybersecurity. And that I don't understand.
I mean, one of the big drivers, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I think the maturity on the board has to be up to the level that implying cybersecurity is a profit-driven. That's, I think, the maturity need to be there. They only look in profit and loss. Cybersecurity should be added as a profit. You're gonna win contracts if you are more on that, apply more cybersecurity into your organization.
So one of the big drivers that boards will have to look into cyber is obviously regulation. And we have a few regulations coming up, exciting ones. We heard about them many times before today. I would like to twist a bit the angle and ask you, PSD2 was used in many discussions. I heard the argument of cybersecurity that it's actually dangerous for the cyber defense to introduce PSD2. I would like to hear your view on that position.
Yeah, well, let me just take one step back. I personally believe that the current stage of regulation is we are in a stage of overregulation. And overregulation just has a negative impact on what they want to achieve. I personally believe regulators have to take a step back and change their approach completely, because just putting another 400 pages of rules doesn't make any sense. It doesn't help, and it just defocuses. So I think also regulators need to think about disrupting their own approach and come up with a complete new model. That's my first thing. My second argument is, and that's why I agree, PSD2 or whatever regulation is added increases significantly the risk of cybersecurity of your own company. Why? Simply because the company has no more resources. There's so much, if you talk to banks and corporates and whatever, they're all dealing with regulation and GDPR and PSD2 and whatever, I can't even name it. And a lot of these things is really not useful, doesn't add any value, and takes resources away from something which is much more important, defend your own company against external, but also, as we heard, internal threats. And that's why I believe overregulation leads to increase of cybersecurity risks of companies.
Maybe can I challenge that view? How about GDPR? I mean, for the first time, organizations are fined for data breaches.
Yeah, but does that solve the problem? Certainly not. When I talk to companies at the moment, everyone is completely lost in GDPR. I'll give you an example. There's a company who does sensitive data, risk, let's just call customer risk data. And they make their business model selling this risk data to 250 other providers. GDPR says, you company A have to make sure that these 250 other companies are GDPR compliant. Okay, tell me how they should do this. There is no one who can provide a solution. And regulators, you ask them, they just say, well, yeah, it's not thought through. I think this is the problem. We got a guideline which hasn't been thought through. It's just a lot of bureaucratic burden.
Oversaturation.
Yeah, and it doesn't help
terms.
us. You know, it's just something, I always say less is more. And that's the problem. Now everyone is struggling with that. Each of you guys get hundreds of emails of GDPR. Guess how many of these GDPR emails are scams and are used for that thing. So, sorry, it's just like a little bit counterproductive, and I think that's where we need a rethink.
Rafael?
I just wanted to pick up on, because the regulatory point is really interesting, and I think it's worth thinking about it a bit. To my mind, the regulatory challenge for cybersecurity is slightly different than what regulators are trying to do with capital regulation or liquidity regulation or the other things that have been torturing us over the past 20 years. And I think that the difference is, in order to create an effective and safe financial services environment, in order to guard the country against the systemic risks that these impose, we need to go from a situation where banks are sitting on their intelligence and on their know-how with respect to how to respond to cyber attacks, and sharing that. and creating a lot more collaboration. So that it's the same principle that I think the intelligence communities have adopted post 9/11. But it's going from a need to know to a need to share type environment.
Do you think GDPR is helping in this respect? That they're
I
joining forces to solve the same problems?
I think in many ways GDPR is sort of taking people's eye off of the ball, because the core thing that the regulators I think need to push and foster in order to improve cybersecurity in the industry is this sort of collaboration. But they can't actually go in and mandate private companies. Now you have to play nice and start collaborating with each other.
It's a very sensitive area to reveal what your
there are
vulnerabilities
huge trust issues that need to be overcome. There are huge issues with respect to the role that the regulator themselves need to play in such a system. But the regulators, and you've seen this, I think the US is maybe the most advanced with the FSARC schematic, but the regulators there have let the banks and infrastructure providers work out themselves according to some rules. There's some guardrails that they have to abide by, but they've let them work out themselves how that system works and then given it their blessing. In Europe, I find that regulators tend to be a lot more directive and are very uncomfortable playing that sort of role.
Thanks. Rafael, what's your view as a CIO, from a CIO perspective, to deal with...
Giving a different view, I think, how the GDPR will be used as a tool for the cybercrime. So, in terms of extortion money from companies, if you're not complying. So that, I think, is for us in the corporate environment, we have to fulfill all the obligations to make sure the data is protected and the data of individuals are safe with the right measurements. But as we see that happening is Uber decides to deal with the crooks on the background. So are we saying that that could become a way of a business to not damage the reputation in terms, and also not paying the fine? Are we forgetting about the fine that is 2 to 4%, if not wrong, about the turnover? I'm not saying that this applies to everyone, but I think compliance is in one way will make companies more safer because they're going to have to invest more resources in order to comply. But in the other way is adding as a hacking tool for the new ransomware to be a kind of a way to extortion money from companies using the compliance.
Okay, so are you referring to PSD2 as opening up API interfaces?
Well, when we create a compliance in order to the company to follow that guidelines, we also can be against that. Cybercrime doesn't need that. They will use everything against your organization. And I think, I'm not saying that compliance is a bad thing, it's a good thing, but also could be more in the favor of the cybercrime instead to be on our favor.
I would like to know from you, are you also collaborating in terms of with your peers on problems you face on a daily basis? Is it something you do actively, or like informally or more formally?
Yeah, I think that the main problem is we are not very good to share threads between our organizations. We don't share intelligence enough. If we could share, then it would be great, because and then we're going to be better to protect ourselves. But this is going to the barrier of sharing commercial values, instead to be sharing knowledge how to defend your organization in collaborative way. So, for example, one thing that I quite like, the Hong Kong policy, they create a framework based on shared threads for all the organizations, something that we are not doing at all.
Let me add to that. I think this is, and also Mark mentioned that, I like this point, because, again, cybersecurity is like terrorism. It's like crime. And usually government is responsible for protecting citizens and companies against crime. That's why companies and people pay taxes. They don't do it, or they don't only do it partly. I believe it must be, in order to really attack cyber crime and all these different variations of that, you need a very strong cooperation led by government, whatever it is, MI5, MI6 in this country, but you need it also across Europe, and we don't have that. Every country does what it's absolutely wrong. And then you need these people, super professional guys who are working with the chief security officers, which normally deal with cybersecurity in the individual companies, and they are their touching point, their discussion point. That's where all the data flows. When someone sees something, they can alert all the other market participants. I think that's what we really need. This is something where we should, and there where regulators should change their stand and said, no regulation, but we take an initiative to proactively try to fight something which is really threatening companies and private individuals. And that I would like to see, because for me, that's the only way to really work together, and we need to do it on a European level, because otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah,
But that implies also that the know-how on the government level is extremely high, not only in terms of cybersecurity, but also in terms of what typically infrastructure topics are that companies face.
Absolutely, and they should be. Sorry, they should be, because I think they have to hire. Look, go to Israel. Look at the Mossad. They got the obviously super educated computer scientists who are working on cybercrime and cyber attack and cyber defense.
Obviously for
the Russians have that. The Chinese have. They have hundreds of thousands of people who work on that field. Only the Europeans will, we have, forget about Brexit and all that nonsense. We have to, they have to stick together and share their resources, because each country alone can't do it. And that's what I believe.
But you know what I think?
The cybersecurity team, the Mossad example you brought, the pressure is so high, obviously, to defend the country, right?
Yes.
So how, this is a challenge. How can you make the pressure as high? Mark, please.
Yeah, no, I agree. But I think if you take what you're saying, Pierre, to the logical extension, what we need is a sense of purpose around cybersecurity. And I find it very enlightening to talk to people in the industry who are involved in catching cyber criminals. So they're taking information from various banks, from law enforcement. They're putting all the jigsaw pieces together. They're handing over files to law enforcement agencies, and they're going out and arresting people. And there are perp walks on the BBC in the evening. And I think that sends a great signal. It's a deterrent, and we shouldn't underestimate the deterrent effect of that. But also it gives the industry a sense of purpose and accomplishment. At the end of the day, it's about putting these people either behind bars or getting them off the street. It's stopping them from attacking. And I think that sense of purpose is kind of missing at the moment in the dialogue.
And I would like to add one point. There's so much money coming from governments, UK or IF, European Investment Fund, etc., going into generic technology funds. I think it's time for Europe or European governments to wake up and to focus very particularly on funding cybersecurity technology companies who really help with modern stuff. That's what Israel does as well. They got that. That's why they are very strong in security. And I think we need there, that's where money would be well spent and where people would come in. And if you see in the US, for example, everything which is regarding security, guess who are the main investors at the beginning? That's something of concern. And I think we don't have this urgency here in Europe. I don't know why, but we don't have it on government level, we don't have it on corporate level, we don't have it on banking level, and I think that needs to change.
And especially cybersecurity know-how is such a strong positioning also from branding perspective. It's to spill over to any financial services organization and so forth. So absolutely couldn't agree more from a startup perspective. Let me go into another topic. I would love to hear with your expertise and view. Technology, to what extent technology is driving cybersecurity. I mean, my company, I do authentication based on machine learning, taking into account context, like ambient noise. And obviously machine learning is a big driver to be able to do so. To what extent do you see artificial intelligence as a driver for current cyber defense regimes?
If I may start?
Please, Pierre.
One problem I see, and that's also when you discuss blockchain, and blockchain is about decentralization. I believe the biggest problem we have is when you see 1 million credit card data have been stolen. Why was that so easy? And what is the motivation for the hacker? Very simple. There's one central hub. He can spend his energy to hack that and getting access to 1 million data. The moment you decentralize stuff and put it, for example, on the mobile phone, why should he put any effort in to hack one single individual? So that's one of the things. That's why I believe technology has to evolve, because we go more and more mobile on that one.
Well, I think first of all, the cybercrime industry is a business-driven module, and we have to be aware that every dollar they spend or invest, they have 1,500% back. So it's a huge number. And I'm not saying that the government doesn't do enough, but the money that the cybercrime industry is making following the Bromium report provided on RSA is $1.5 trillion. So it's a huge amount of money.
Per year?
Per year, yeah. So if you think this in a comparison, how can we be more sophisticated to protect the industry? That we are not spending enough, first of all, and people still not believe that cybersecurity is a threat. So it's a lot of lack of clarity there. And I think machine learning, it will be a great help in order for the data that we the logs that we provide, or we kind of provide and we generate, is so far superior that a human can control. So machine learning will be helping most of the organizations to be more accurate into deal with a cyber threat in case something comes. But machine learning would not replace yet the human brain. So for fact, yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think you know, if I look at the tools that Oliver Wyman is building in the AML and in the cyberspace, we can already see fantastic applications of machine learning to good effect. And you know, as someone whose first computer language was Fortran 77, I'm blown away at how easy it is these days to create natural language processing and stuff using open source tools. And I think that will continue, and that we should leverage that to the utmost. But I would make two comments. First, I often see you know, CISOs and information security officers reaching for machine learning, when in fact, simple statistical analysis and scatter plots would tell you a lot. There's an awful lot of improvement that we can make in our controls using standard techniques, and we shouldn't be too quick to dismiss those. The second thing that I actually worry about is, you know, I worry that the technology at the moment is kind of outpacing our ability to generate the control frameworks that we need. It's almost like being in a, you know, it's being in a cockpit of an airplane and trying to fly it, and you have 10,000 buttons, all of which are flashing, and you don't know which one to pick. We need to harness technology, I think, to make the control of cyber along all these different dimensions usable. And I guess that comes back to your human point, Rafael.
And looking at the future, to close our round, this time has flown so quickly, so I would like to thank my great panelists. To close the round, I would like to know from you, what is the biggest technology driver that could still influence the cyber industry going forward in a couple, like, let's say 3-4 years down the road? What areas you see?
I will say blockchain will probably be one of the ways to deal with. There is various projects on the area, and I think decentralized assistance is very effective, because one, you cannot attack a central point. So saying that, for example, what we're going to see in the future will be a database that probably today you hire with one of these cloud providers, or maybe you have your own, but normally operating inside of the blockchain. So in terms of a perspective of attacker, how he could attack a central point if your database is split in various nodes on the blockchain. So it's very unlikely for him to assemble all these nodes that has information of your data in order to collect the database, but open to a different other scenario to exploitation on the database, but blockchain.
Very brief answer, Pierre?
Yeah, I agree. As I said before, decentralization, AI, smart, I agree with that as well, AI, blockchain. And last but not least, awareness of boards and of companies, institutions, and governments to work together.
Thank you, Pierre. Mark, final word to you.
Yeah, no, I agree. Crypto would have been my answer. I think that there's some. We're already seeing amongst you know, attacks over the last 6 months the use of crypto, and that's.
Mark, Rafael, and Pierre, thank you so much for sharing your views. Big round of applause. And I think everyone will be around for a few questions one-to-one. We didn't receive so many questions, unfortunately. We're happy to take them one-to-one. Thank you.